Hi, Mike. Good evening, everyone.
A pleasure to admit. All right. Oh. Yeah, okay, David, you can go first. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, what's up? I'm trying to admit everybody, but I'll listen to your question.
Yes. So while everyone is joining, I wanted to ask you a question because I saw that you published the table of content of your upcoming World of History book, and I was just curious about when you think it will be finished. I know that you said it's a symphony, so it takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
but I was
Okay.
just
Look, I'm I'm 66. I have advanced cancer. This is never going to get finished. If I'm lucky, I'll get another few years and I can add to it. But this is a very big project. And I started it late because I hadn't intended to do any such thing at all. And then it just sort of began to grow. Uh, it has a strange background to the story. One of my former students at Princeton had become uh, had gotten a big promotion at one of those New York literary agencies, and he called me up. I hadn't talked to him in years, and told me to get me $1 million if I write this book, because he had heard me give a lecture on the history of the world at Princeton. And I told him I wasn't interested, but then again, I was sick, so I figured I would write this and the money would go to my girls. All right. I turned out not to die. I actually started the book, but didn't communicate much with the guy. He got another job, went to someplace else in LA. So now it's a project with no place to go. And it doesn't really matter much because it's so big that it's grown outside my scale. If I had started this earlier in life, I might have completed it, but it wouldn't be all that good. This is a weird kind of a book. It's not like much else. Uh, in the 1980s and 90s, when the Western Civ courses were dismantled, they were looking to dismantle them in favor of various kinds of uh, other offerings. But I took this as a time to continue my work in the history of the world, particularly in the intellectual history of the world. I had done that when I was a graduate student, but I also got hired to do this at Johns Hopkins. Uh, when I was in college, I heard William McNeill lecture. When I was in graduate school, I heard Curtin lecture. So I've had some very good teachers, and what I've managed to do since I'm now old is integrate what I know about the Western tradition, which is extensive, but increasingly less so since my brain is turning into Swiss cheese. And I know some about the intellectual traditions in both the old world and the new world. I particularly focused on mathematics and physics. Um, it's a very cool set of comparisons, but what I'm doing, oh, sorry, yeah. Uh, but what I'm doing now is trying to connect the various cultures to the kind of physics that they produced, because these are all related. So, David, you got a hand up, right? Go ahead. You got a question?
so I have to lower it. So I did not understand in the end. You think you will not be able to publish the finished book, but will we have a way to have access to it, maybe via Patreon?
Okay, well, I am actually going to. I have worked on it since the stuff that I put up, and now it's more coherent and more complete. Look, I'm only about a third done. I think this would be something on the order of a 2,000-page book, but I mean, right now what is it, 375 pages in, which in a book would be twice that. So, I mean, even if you thought of it, see, the problem is that I've done the beginning and I've done the end, and I have a pretty good grasp on everything up to about the year 1000. But I'm not, yeah, So I'm splitting it. I'm coming up to the near year 1000. The problem is between 1000 and now, the complexity and hyper complexity of things makes knowing what to leave out very, very hard, because in a way, everything is connected to everything else. So what do I need? Well, I look at the history of physics, particularly Enlightenment physics, and then the humanistic culture that develops around it. And then I also look at the quantum revolution and relativity in the 20th century, and the same thing. Right now, there's some very smart people in places like the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton that are working on a 5.0, a theory of everything. And if that happens, you can be sure that all the other domains of culture will have to be changed, because our self-understanding will change when we understand, our understanding of nature changes. Vinny?
Yeah, I have a question regarding your previous lecture. You talked about, you mentioned how our progress and cultivation of our understanding of the physical world is layering on top of our previous ones. And I'm curious of how is it that we would see our most primitive scientific framework, physics 1.0, myth physics, in the contemporary world?
Because they ask different questions and try and solve different problems. Look, proof that we have this layering, go to a hospital sometime, and you might find that the radiological medicine unit is next door or across the hall from the chapel. All right. And let me tell you, people are running 1.0 and 4, actually 1.n and 4.n. And you will find it because, well, there are certain things that you would like to make sure that you take every possible avenue. I mean, look, I know what it's like to have a 1-year-old that's dying, who's in intensive care. And look, I'm making a payment plan with God. Of course, I want all the proper medicine done. I would not fail to do that. But there's nothing like throwing yourself back on the primitive reactions that you have, and they're all buried in all of us. So I think of it this way. We still say that the sun rises and sets. Educated people look up their horoscopes. Now, the horoscopes are actually science 2.0. Okay, earth, air, fire, and water signs. That's earth, air, fire, and water, which are the elements from Empedocles. So we break bottles on ships. Why? Because it'd be bad luck not to. They have to be christened. So, I mean, look at these holdovers. We believe in them. Try and get an established sea captain to take that ship, unless something gets broken on it. They don't like it. And look, I'm not going to get in the way of beliefs that sustain people. So, yeah, we're all this layering of archaic intellectual structures. And that's what I mean by that. All right. What next? Somebody else. I will release more. I mean, I'll go back and look at what I have. I guess I have about the first 90 pages clean, and bits and pieces somewhere. There's a little part that I just felt like doing about the New World and Epic. So I included Derek Walcott, but then compared those for and against the empire. And my comparison was really good. You might call avatars of the empire and its opposition. Teddy Roosevelt and Che Guevara. They're actually an amazing pair. They're both weak, asthmatic kids that take up boxing, and they go on a journey. I mean, it's all epic. Teddy goes west because that's the way Americans go. Che goes north because that's the way all of South America works. They're on a north-south axis, and when they go on their journeys, that's the way they go. So it has to do with the different orientations of the two cultures, but actually both of them are pretty good examples of the best that culture produces, and they're also slightly insane, right? No, I mean, there's some crazy stuff going on there. I mean, both of them are fanatical in a way, that make you wonder what's going on there. Teddy got shot in the chest while delivering a speech and kept on delivering it.
Right.
Okay. I mean, what do you want me to do with that? On the other hand, Che Guevara, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he later gave an interview with a English socialist newspaper, and he said at the time that he wanted to launch. And I'm saying, well, look, the Russians must have just rolled their eyes and said, "Are you out of your mind?" But Che was a true believer, is the problem. This is what happens when Catholicism gets transformed into a political lingo. The end of the world isn't so scary if you think that something's great is going to happen afterwards. So both of them were flawed but heroic men. What else? I mean, questions. Kyle +4. Okay.
After reading the Analects and the works of Mencius, what would you recommend to read next?
Chuang Tzu. I really like that guy.
Thank
He
you.
has a wry sense of humor. He's wise to all the seductions of the world, and he lives like a hermit, very simply. And he's a Taoist sage. And so a Catholic, a Christian that I happen to like, Thomas Merton, likes Chuang Tzu, and actually wrote a book called The Sayings of Chuang Tzu. And the reason I think they got along is that both of them lived essentially isolated lives and contemplative lives. And Chuang Tzu is a great favorite of mine. So I think you would like that. What else do I like? You should read Mo Tzu. You should read some of the legalists. They sort of sound like Hobbes, and they're not completely wrong. You have to remember that because China was from the very beginning a continental-sized polity, there's no way you could get around with saying, why don't we hold elections? That's not a possibility. So they don't have the elaborate history of political theory that you find in the West, where you have various kinds of decentralization and ways of looking to kind of connect things. In China, they realize that they need strong central authority right from the word go. Once it gets imposed by the first emperor, they know they've gotten it right, and it is the longest lasting political form in the history of the world. You get better than 2,000 years out of that until it finally collapses in 1912. All right, so I would say that China, apart from the last 500 years, probably the most successful of the world civilizations. You know, lots of civilizations are impressive for different things, but the Chinese really got right the kind of government that you need for a country that has that quality. JT, are we with you with me? Who's JT?
I'm with you, sir.
What's up?
First of all,
What's up?
thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing knowledge. So I was wondering, as you mentioned, we're going to have to mention Hobbes a few times. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on David Wengrow and the late great David Graeber's thoughts on our being locked in this argument between the neo-Hobbesians and the neo-Rousseauians, and this idea about the advent of agriculture leading to this like Garden of Eden, fall from grace and civilization, and upward complexity being necessarily tied to upwardly mobile hierarchy as well. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you think that's leading us? Are we in neo-feudalism, all that?
Oh, God. Well, a couple of things. First off, historians don't know any more about the future or what happens to be going on than anybody else, right? There's always a temptation to predict things, and I try and stay away from it. But if you're going to ask, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I've actually read The Dawn of Everything for my sins. And I was underwhelmed. At least half of that book is just make-believe. And the hard thing about it is, you know how I start my work with an evaluation of the historiography? Well, the thing that I was driven to by the suggestion of some friends, well-meaning friends, I think, who liked the book, said that I should really read it, and I did. And well, you would have to look at what I wrote, but suffice it to say, release the Kraken. I mean, there a lot of this stuff is just made up. It's whatever. Whenever non-historians decide they're going to create some new historical breakthrough, all the pros in the room think to themselves, "Oh God, not another!" Right? And this is just something. Or my argument would be that it's agitprop for their particular kind of anarchist political leanings, and I don't think that anarchy is a practical political alternative. The reason why is that organizations will always exist in a predatory fashion when everybody else decides to decentralize and reach their and reach consensus and all the rest of that stuff. In fact, that's almost never happened anywhere. It did not happen among Native Americans. What I really put in there, or at least in my volume, is what Native American warfare really was like. To give you an example, Kandarian, the guy who goes and impresses everyone in Paris and all that stuff, he never left North America. I mean, this is just make-believe. That's number one. And I give the evidence for that in my write-up. But in addition to that, I mean, that's bad enough. But the idea that the novel represents him in some verbatim way is just make-believe too. It's a genre of literature. So there are all kinds of problems with this book. It's tendentious and it tries my patience. And I'm sorry to hurt your feelings if you really like the book, but I'm going to post my new historiographical thing, and then you can read it. It's about 30 pages long. It's like 10,000 words.
I can't wait. Thank you.
All right. I wanted to like it because my friends told me I would like it, and it left me banging my head on the desk. Thank you. All right, let's go. Next one. Telos.
Hello.
Here comes Purpose. I love it. What's up?
Hi, my name's actually Mark. When you were talking, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool. So you said, I caught your words, Catholicism gets transformed into political lingo,
Oh, yeah.
right? So with America is in God we trust.
Right.
So if we're going to start anywhere, it's in God we trust. Can you talk a little bit maybe about the process of transmutation by which we can form or fuse or unite with the divine or original form? And, do you see how does humanity survive our technological adolescence without destroying ourselves? It feels like, the war in Ukraine and everything like that. And it seems like you're changing perceptions of people. And I think you have great words. And these are like the issues of our time, I feel, is
that the question? And so what is the question? You see, it's about a dozen questions, like a quiver of arrows.
Have you read the prophecy of Isaiah?
In the book of Isaiah, would that do?
Yeah.
I mean, like in the Bible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read the Bible.
Can you talk about that?
I can, yeah. Isaiah is one of my favorite prophets. What I recently tried to figure out why the major prophets like Ezekiel and Isaiah are so different from the kind of language and the kind of thinking about God and the representation of God that we get early on, say in the Pentateuch, or even, very starkly in the book of Judges, right? They come into the promised land and they really wail on people, and Yahweh likes it. He tells them to do that because he's their special personal God. And he doesn't seem to be insisting upon universal moral rules because there are special rules for his special people. But here's what's interesting, or at least I found it interesting. They are overwhelmed. The 10 tribes are lost in 722 and the Assyrians attack. We say goodbye to them. Who knows where they went? But the other two hang around until 586. The Babylonians overwhelm Jerusalem. They send the Israelites back to Babylon and they enslave. All right, so that's where we get the psalm by the rivers of Babylon when we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. Okay, they are culturally influenced, and one of the things all of the prophets emphasize is that syncretism is dangerous. You can't do that. You can't bring in foreign stuff because that always leads to God's anger and then God's punishment. So they work very hard at maintaining their traditions. And at this point, when they move to Babylon, these traditions haven't been written up in a canonical form yet. They're still oral. They go to Babylon, and there are and the Babylonians are running things. They're polytheists, and it's a reprise of what happened to the chosen people in Egypt. Right? They understand that they're in slavery because they did something bad and that history has providence behind it. Now, a century or so later, Darius, the emperor of Persia, conquers Babylon while the Israelites are in it. Now, the Israelites, at least for the first generation or two, remain as slaves, but it had to have completely blown their minds to find out that the Persians were monotheists. They're Zoroastrians, which means that they have monotheism plus a gigantic empire. Now, I'm reasonably confident that our chosen people prior to this had no idea that anybody else was monotheistic. And this generates a whole storm of problems. Do the Persians and the Israelites worship the same one God? Can there be two one gods? What's going on here? If we're both worshiping the same one God, how come we get enslaved and they get a giant empire? This has got to make you stop and think. They thought they were completely unique. Well, here we have people who worship one God, who disagree with us about a whole bunch of the stories, but they seem to be given the hand of God because they've decided to release us and let us go back to Jerusalem. And we're going to rebuild the second temple, and we're going to sit down and we're going to write down the canonical Hebrew scriptures. This is when the prophets like Ezekiel and who am I thinking of? Isaiah, they get written down probably from a collection. Isaiah was either 2 or 3 parts probably. And some of it's pre-exilic, some of it's exilic, some of it's post-exilic. But here's the funny thing. If you look in Isaiah, Isaiah says, Yahweh, please take care of your chosen people, the Israelites. And the people, I forget the exact quote, but the people of your hand, the Assyrians, and the people of your, providence, the Egyptians. Suddenly, the idea of a single God is completely universal, and he's gone all Kantian on us. Everything, all moral rules now are universal. There's no local rules that allows the Israelites to do anything that anybody else isn't allowed to do. What they've done is transformed the conception of Yahweh. He's been enlarged. He's no longer local. And now, I mean, the prophetic writer sounds like Kant. God's everybody's pal, or rather, he's everybody's father. And what that means is that the providence that had previously been bestowed on one chosen people implicitly now is equally bestowed on everybody. This is setting the stage for what will turn into Christianity. All right, sorry, you happened to ask a question and I went off, but that's the answer as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
If I could I actually chip in on this one?
Yes, you can.
So you will know far more about this than me. I'm getting this information from a secondhand source, and I have my own question too. But just like chipping in, because I actually asked my a friend of mine who's an Old Testament scholar about this, and the way he described it was, at least as far as he was aware, the way the ancient Israelites thought about God prior to Isaiah was not so much polytheistic, or it was still Yahweh was, you had Yahweh and you had all these other gods. But Yahweh was like, it was like a scale, and Yahweh was at the top um, of all the other gods of all the other nations. And Isaiah comes in, and I think you're probably right that faced with Zoroastrianism, there's a challenge of another monotheistic religion, and Isaiah comes around and he solidifies it. He says, no, no, all these other gods aren't actually even gods. It's just Yahweh. So
That's an excellent answer.
It's not so much that there was a shift, so much as there was a reframing, as happens a lot with religions. I'm not sure the content of what the Israelites believed changed so much as there was a reframing of what was going on, if that makes any sense.
God never lies, but he reveals himself in stages. All right.
I think that's right. Yeah.
But you said beware of synchronicity and synchronism.
Syncretism.
Syncretism.
Not synchronicity, two completely different things.
Synchronism.
No, you know, you got
synchronism.
Not synchronism, syncretism.
Syncretism. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
There it is on the online. Syncretism, right? It's an excellent thing to know if you're studying the Bible, because they're really excited about it. Because that's how the chosen people remain coherent. They avoid, the idea is to avoid syncretism. It doesn't mean that they in practice do, and that's what gets them into trouble in a way. All right. Now, the point just made that the chosen people, the Israelites, have rethought God. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But let me translate that idea. How about this? Since I think that God is man's idea of himself, I think that what that means is that they changed an understanding of who and what they are when they got a chance to do a little traveling and find a gigantic monotheistic empire that frees them from the slavery that was a result of their previous sin. So, yeah, they're going to have to become much more cosmopolitan. And your point about God not initially revealing himself as the only God, that's actually true. If you remember back in the 10 Commandments, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have strange gods before me. But the point is that the idea that you can't have strange gods before him means that there have to be strange gods. It's not until later on that Isaiah just straightens it out and says, look, there's only one God. All right. He was letting you believe there were others. He didn't tell you differently. He never lied to you. But now I've had it revealed to me there's only one. And that means that whatever the Persians are worshiping can't be the right one. But we have to get our act together, rebuild the city, rebuild the temple, and codify scripture. And that's what they're going to do next. But if we could, let's go beyond scripture, because I want to talk about the history of the world and stuff. And it must have been kind of a strange lecture, since I employ an odd set of analogies. So who wants to take a shot? Shall I just hit Ryan and 7 raised hand? Hello, Ryan. Hello.
I think Alex
just people have been waiting before me. I just don't want to cut the queue or anything.
Well, I think Alex should go first.
Okay, who goes next?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Hi, Alex. What's up?
So regarding your video and the history of the world, and skimming off the top, it seems like well-managed skim, as I'm going to call it, or profit or whatever, leads to you having more warriors, more control, being able to do personal projects like build pyramids, and those things are considered great because well, you control kind of the culture top down. So you're, hey, this is a great thing, and you're all involved. So there's kind of like a bias there. And so what do you think about like when the skim gets too much and the society starts to shift? Like, what are your thoughts about that? And what would well-managed skim be? Like, is it Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, where you have to, you know, forgive people for maybe being stupid and reckless and all the other things and just try to, you know, deliver justice?
Wow. Okay. I mean, look, I'm a recovering Marxist from a long time ago, but I know my way around Marxist literature, or at least as it existed 40 years ago when I walked away. But when you asked me about this, see, it makes it hard for me to frame. Try it again. Remind me what I'm trying to do. This is just my own Swiss cheese brain from the cancer meds. I didn't
Sure.
do this.
We started with the elites skimming off the top.
Okay, yeah, okay. Now I'm fine. You see, that's what happens. Here's what happens. Characteristically, elites follow PPP, pure predator parasitism, right? Think of what Achilles was like. I will kill you because that's what I came here to do. I'm going to take everything that I want because everybody else is going to be dead. Think of Gilgamesh raping the local women. There's no moral order, or there's no moral relation between conquerors and conquered. It's like catching and domesticating cattle. Okay, so the domesticating subject people. The problem is if you allow PPP, if you allow rapacity and a lack of moral relation to become permanent as a relationship between conquered and conquered people, that will destabilize intrinsically, right? What it does, the problem is that the elite grows faster than the underclass, and eventually there's not enough to be given to the entire elite. They fraction or they get invaded from the outside, but either way, they haven't learned Machiavelli's lesson. You have to avoid being hated. And the way you avoid being hated is by inventing a new thing. And the people that invent these new things in all the great geographical areas are the founders of the great world religions. In other words, these religions, Marx got this completely inverted. That's why I wanted to talk connected to Marx. Marx says it's the opium of the masses, and they need it in order to control the masses and, you know, hoodwink the masses and all. May I suggest that that's a solution in search of a problem? They have no problem controlling the masses. They have an admirable technology they've worked out to that that works for that. It's called the bronze spearhead, and it's extremely persuasive, and it works a lot better than talking to people about myths. So when Marx says, well, you know, they use it as, you know, to control the people, they have metal weapons. They don't need stories to control the people. What the real danger is that they need stories to control themselves, right? Unless they control themselves, they're going to be hated by those people. But if they control their libidos, and they'll do so with reference to a new idea, it's called justice. Well, then by doing justice to your own people, they move from being slaves to being plebs. And that opens another realm at the bottom of people that you can still treat like livestock. But now you have a moral and thus political connection between the elite and the plebs. That means that when they have these internal conflicts or external invasion, the plebs side with their own leaders because they have a buy-in. What does that do? It means that adding religion to these unstable conqueror states allows the conquerors to control not the underclass, it allows them to control themselves. And it's by doing that that they actually get enlightened self-interest. If you rape all the local women and stab a lot of people, you might have a real jolly time. It'd be a real Viking picnic. But the problem is your grandson's head is going to be on a stick. If you, on the other hand, want to start a dynasty that lasts 500 years, well, then you're going to have to make the people you depend on like you. And that means you're going to have to treat them in a predictable way, which is going to involve establishing relations of justice. Because, as Plato says, what makes people hate it is injustice. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the great world religions are functional. And their function is to stabilize and allow for the continuation of complex political order. That's why you never see one without the other. And in the times you do, like, say, my generation, you know, people have given up on religion. We're probably the most rapacious generation of human locusts that has appeared on the scene. In other words, the top 10% of American income earners take in 40% of the GDP now, and it was 30% 35 years ago. So most of the increase in America's GDP has gone to people who no longer have a set of myths which helps them restrain themselves. And what do you get then? You get the Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, that's exactly how it seems to go. And I wanted to comment that it seems like the goal of modern society, it's like we're adapting our technology, right? And we're trying to automate slavery. Like the washing machine, you know, you don't need a slave to wash your clothes anymore, for example. It's a good way to think about it. But it seems like the final level of automation is we replace it with artificial intelligence or stupid artificial intelligence, something like that.
Yeah.
Like in that transitionary period. I wonder.
It could be. I honestly don't know. There are people making all kinds of predictions about AI. I think that the great variety of the predictions suggests that nobody knows what they're talking about.
Oh, shit.
You know, usually, for example, when you get sick, if doctors say 10 doctors give you 10 cures, none of them know how to fix it. If doctors give you the same cure, they know what's going on. Same sort of thing with AI. You can get anxious about it, but nobody knows.
Great Lakes. It's a real German.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
It's yeah, it's good.
Mute yourself.
It's
Hello?
from Cleveland, Ohio. That's why I'm getting by. And I'm like, yeah.
DJ Jones, can you mute yourself, please?
Oh,
I don't know what this is here. All right, thank you. All right. Next question. Where do you want me to go?
I think it's Evan now.
Yeah, Evan.
Yeah, so I have a kind of neuroscience related question. I'll try to thread all of these thoughts together if I can. But I really liked your you picked up on the neuroscientific idea that indeed, you know, the brain itself is plastic, and there's a direct hardware connection between, you know, our brain and our consciousness and the external world. And it's a dynamic dialectical relationship. It's not just, you know, we observe the world and we have access to, you know, the noumena or the things in themselves through, you know, abstracted objectivity. One of the things that I kind of wanted to push back on a little bit was your assertion that that gets rid of metaphysics. To me, that's where metaphysics comes out of in the modern sort of scientific epoch, which has gotten rid of metaphysics a lot. And that seems to me also connected to the fact that we're connected to each other. And I wanted to get your input. I'm sorry that this is very sort of like lots of threads all over the place, but I wanted to get your input on the development of history in terms of information, and that we're connected to each other now, but we're also connected to each other through the information of previous civilizations. So we're connected to people who are long gone now.
We are cumulative.
Yeah, and to me that I guess I wanted to gauge your ideas on how what kind of metaphysics that might imply, if metaphysics you think it's needed for that kind of conception, or
those of you who know Chalmers, the guy who writes on neuroscience and the brain and such, and the hard problem of consciousness. When I look at the hard problem of consciousness, my own personal reaction is to throw up my hands. Yes, I see how intellectually tidy it would be if we could reduce everything to biochemistry. On the other hand, if you were to allow, this is kind of a Wittgensteinian thing. Suppose you were to work out the entire biochemistry. It's, like 100 times more complicated than the Krebs cycle. Well, then you might still ask the question, what's it like to experience red? Right? And no matter how clever these guys get in tinkering and putting these things together, jumping the line from the world of objects, the external public world, and the world of, for want of a better word, interior experience, well, unfortunately, it refuses to go away. Now, one way of trying to do it is what Bishop Berkeley did. You can abolish the external world. I think that would appeal to Plato and Buddha too, but that's kind of inconvenient, it turns out. So what we have instead is we're stuck with both a unified approach to the world, which reduces reductive materialism or something like it, and a bifurcated view of the world, like Cartesian dualism. And the problem is that doesn't make any sense either, because if there is some special spooky stuff that's not made of matter, well, then you've just put back the question and made it impossible to solve. How does this spooky stuff slip inside meat and make it do stuff like this? And you'll realize that that's completely mysterious. It's completely unintelligible, and no one can explain that either. So we're stuck with it. I think that Sartre and some of the existentialist writers are correct in the sense that subjectivity is primitive. I mean, it's just there. It's a given. I distrust any theory that makes it go away. And here's why. I sometimes wonder whether it's smarter to judge our theories on the basis of our experience or our experience on the basis of our theories. There's something slightly mad about telling yourself and other people that they're not experiencing the world the right way. Well, what would the right way be? Apparently, the guy telling them would know that. And then the next question, well, how did you find out this was the right way? Unless you're one of those prophets we had talked about earlier. You see what I'm saying? So when you have a theory that's really impressive and there's a lot of biochemistry going on there, when they say thus, red, and I say, I have never experienced anything like that, but regrettably, I was in first grade and I know what red looks like. And it's not that, because you're talking about the external world and I'm talking about the internal world of experience. And because it doesn't fit into your theory, doesn't make it stop existing. It just means it doesn't fit into your theory. And now you whisk it away with a broom and say, well, if it doesn't fit into my theory, so much for that. I'm not sure if that's crazy or not.
Yeah, it's for what it's worth. I think I agree with that position. I wrote a paper this last year about that very thing. Yeah, thank you. That was great.
All right, let me get it. The next one, JT. Where is JT +5? All right, JT.
I'd love to, but let someone else go before I go a second time.
All right.
Olive
next in
line.
line.
Andy N.
Oh, I think
Hello?
Olive's actually before me. Or
All right. Well, whoever it is,
Olive?
Olive, you can go.
Olive, go.
Eduardo.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Olive. Is
Okay,
that...
sorry. Oh, it's Oliver. Sorry, it got cut off.
Okay.
I want to show my appreciation. I thought really hard about the Good Samaritan and about the Venn diagram between reason and love. And I really think that's a very good idea to strive towards, even though it might not be reasonable. But the one thing that I was really interested in hearing from your response, especially after all you've been going through, when I heard when I listened to your Schopenhauer lecture about the idea of people going through unfortunate circumstances like all throughout history, and there's no reason to. Schopenhauer had this weird philosophical hell that there's no reason to it, there's no justification at all, and that kind of went out to Franz Kafka to write about his stories and the bureaucracy in the trial. And then you mentioned one time on your Unplugged podcast how you watch David Lynch and you watch Eraserhead.
Yeah.
But no, but I'm really interested.
Forgive
Like
me for that.
my really interested in is what do you think that where does his imagination as creative to kind of come up with this philosophical hell kind of meets the reality of like a horse background like Schopenhauer had. Like he
Yeah.
had a really negative life. Like it did contribute to his worldview, but some people do align with his philosophical. Like where does the imagination, where does the realism come into play? Is that
Okay.
something I can?
All right. That's a long, hard question. I think, again, this is something I got from Nietzsche, and I won't pound the desk and get all excited the way Nietzsche does, but yeah, I have a preference for a life affirming philosophy. I think that stuff like antinatalism or the old Greek idea, which is we find in Schopenhauer again, that it would be better never to have been born. I'm just going to flatly deny that. And nobody has any reason to take either side of it because there's nothing you could really show as evidence. It's you might think of it in some ways as like in baseball, batting left-handed and batting right-handed. But I think it's more than that. I've tried both. I've done both. And I know which I prefer, but I understand the temptation of the other.
Is it because of your like the one side leads to such unhappiness and such selfishness that you don't reach out to someone else and kind of have that hope for something?
It doesn't lead to nothing. It imposes nothing on you here and now. That's in a way what all of Kafka's novels are about. I'm willing to say, I mean, I experience plenitude all the time. I know it will sound strange, but for many years, I've been in the presence of the Lord, and I couldn't get rid of him if I wanted to. I know that doesn't make any sense at all, but the world is full of being, and it has its sacred qualities, and life makes me feel shamanistic. I'm not the slightest bit afraid of being dead. I know that this is going to be hard. I know this is going to be painful. It just doesn't bother me. That's
Sorry to butt in again.
What?
Sorry to butt in, but what happened though? Like, was it just you learning about it and then you just came to your own realization?
It was my experience of the world, and I don't believe that that value is something we invent. I think that that good and evil, beautiful and ugly, true and false, they exist independently of us. In a way, that's what my history of the world is designed to do. I hear an awful lot of squawking about things being socially constructed, gender, religion, politics, government, military, money, technology. How about this? It's a question that my history asks. What constructs society? And back we go to nature. Because if nature doesn't construct society, you owe me an explanation of what does. And if it turns out that society constructs itself, then you've recreated Aquinas's prime mover, and that's you know who. You think it's silly to worship God and it makes sense to worship society because it seems to be the prime mover which creates itself. That's preposterous. Society obviously is derived from evolutionary biology. My history is an attempt to connect those. I think the disconnect is fatal to any attempt at history. All right. So history represents the latest phase in evolutionary biology where some complicated groups figured out how to deploy symbols so that they could collectivize knowledge. I'll take a question in a second, but my final idea, hypothetically speaking, what if, hypothetically, what's happening now is that we're entering a new stage of evolution, and it's analogous to the evolution of multicellular life from monocellular life. And what may be happening is that we may be seeing the evolution of a planet-sized single organism, and the internet would be its developing nervous system. So that may be where this goes. Unlike most people that talk about AI, I don't know how it fits in there, but what we are certainly seeing is continuous with biological evolution. It just moves faster. History accelerates evolution because history allows us to evolve at the level of software. We don't have to wait around for a new brain to evolve. That takes a long time, and they mostly don't work. Now you see the advantage of having history as software. It allows for the acceleration of evolutionary biology to greater complexity and also greater cooperation. If we are smart and we figure out how to overcome our political problems, we can get off this rock and then become God only knows what. I guess Kubrick's Star Baby is what we turn into.
Going
Brock
off.
Lewis. Okay.
Oh no, I only raised my hand recently. It's certainly not me.
Okay. Plus
Yeah,
seven.
it's Andy. It's Andy.
Okay, Andy, what's up?
I think I'm next. Sorry. But you talking about Marxism and the science stuff. Have you heard of Russian cosmonism at all?
Cosmonism?
Well, I'm like Polish and stuff. My family's from that area, but it was a huge
Go ahead.
yeah, it was a huge influence on the Soviet space program, along with like Marxism, because the Fyodorov, the philosopher, he literalized the resurrection aspect of Christianity, where he wanted to resurrect everyone that had ever lived and make them immortal, and then repopulate or like send people into space, like to explore the cosmos. But that was a huge influence on their space program. So that kind of reminded me of that.
Well, remember what I said about elites restraining themselves? Well, there's a physical dimension to that, but there's also an intellectual dimension. At some point, you got to ask yourself, am I letting this go a little too far? You can see the background of the space program as it's described, as you described it, as being connected to an apocalyptic Christian, God knows what stuff going on. That's a pretty tall order, and I think that much of politics, both left and right wing, is in fact disguised religious cults of various kinds, mostly Christian cults. Let me give you an example. When Che Guevara and his friend, his pal, they do the motorcycle journeys. If you've ever read that, it's a very good book. Okay. These guys go north and they see these shanty towns, and they stop in at a leper colony, and they go all the way up until they take a boat over to Miami. You may think that Marx is really important to understanding Che, and he is, but not actually nearly so much so as a different kind of literary journey. What Che was doing was recreating a very Catholic book and a very Catholic epic. What he was doing was going to the bottom of hell, and what he was doing is doing a reprise of Dante's Inferno. If you go back and look at it, he ends up at the bottom of hell when he gets into the US, but all the way up. He's actually going down because if you remember, hell is upside down. right? So Dante enters into it and it gets worse and worse as he goes. And then he finally gets there. And he doesn't need to see any more of America than a couple of neighborhoods in Miami because all hell is really the same.
Yeah.
And so
Like,
that is the book you need to know if you want to understand Che. He's a would-be Christian saint. Why else would a doctor or a medical student spend the summer going on a motorcycle and then spend 2 months at a leper colony? Why? Which is run by a priest. Why? Well, because if you secularize that priest's Christianity and you give it Marxist lingo, and then you impose upon it the Western literary tradition, particularly the Catholic elements of it, it all begins to overlap in a very nice way.
yeah. But at the same time, like, I know the Soviet Union didn't end well, and I guess the communism and the Marxism doesn't work. Would it be because they're both like utopian frameworks that where you're like reorganizing the world, and if it's not, like, what's the place for those utopian frameworks?
In practice, utopia is dystopia. If you really want to eliminate all the bad stuff in the world, then what you're going to end up with is Robespierre's Republic of Virtue. You'll have everybody looking around at everybody else, finding some reason to kill them, right? You'll have mob rule, and the lack of law is not good for people. It's not good for human thriving. So my argument would be that revolutions always eat their own children, but also violent as opposed to conservative revolutions often cause more harm than good. For example, the French Revolution wanted to create a system of elections and regular laws governing the transfer of political power. And that didn't happen until after 1850, after the middle of the century. In America, it wasn't much of a violent revolution, but they did manage to transfer power as early as 1800 without a problem, right? And have continuity. So I'd be inclined to say that the state of revolutionary politics is always asymptotic, and it's a mistake to try and actually achieve it. Instead, if we accept the fact that human beings are not perfectible, which means that you got to give up on Athens, at least in part, and accept the fact that hubris might drive you to say that people are perfectible, and God help you then, because what you get then is Pol Pot. Right? So we have to learn to live with an acceptable amount of corruption. That's one of the things that Hume said. He said, look, a little bit of corruption greases the wheels of government. The real problem is when it gets out of hand. And there's something to be said about that. If you think you're going to eliminate politics being turned into money, I think that's never going to happen unless you have something like the Khmer Rouge. But if you're going to have a free and open society, you got to live with a little corruption. Doesn't mean you have to condone it or approve of it, but the fact that it exists is not that big a deal.
Yeah, sorry, those are really weird questions. Thanks for answering them.
If you want, there's a great book about this, Plunkett of Tammany Hall by Washington. You'll like it. It's a good book. Hello, who's this? I'm seeing John Velasquez. What's up?
Hi.
Hi.
I think it's Ian now, though.
Okay. So who is next? How about Ian? Let's go with Ian. Hello, Ian. What's the deal?
Hi, Dr. Sugrue. I just wanted to thank you so much for all of your videos. I've been watching them for a few years, and they've really helped improve my thinking. So I'm currently studying international relations, and I've heard some people have compared China to Germany in the years before World War I. So I was just wondering, with your grasp of world history and the rise and fall of civilizations and great power conflicts, whether you think there's any merit to that comparison or whether there's some similarities, some differences.
Here's the deal. All right. what you need to do, I guess the time isn't great right now for a student. During your Christmas break, take a week out, I'm not fooling, and read slowly and carefully the landmark edition of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. That is not a joke. I'm telling you, it's a prescription. Read that. All right. It is good for you. Every student of international relations should start their studies with the dialogue at Milos. But there's lots of other stuff there that you absolutely have to know. Now, I don't know any more about the future than anybody else does, but I like to think that I do, just like everybody else. If I really knew the future, I would be a stockbroker. All right. But I don't cash in on it because I don't know jack about the future. Best I can guess is this. We're perilously on the close to a third world war. I think the danger lies more in Mr. Putin than it does in Mr. Z. Unless he gets pushed to the wall, I don't see a direct invasion of China, or at least not now. And again, I could be wrong. It could invade in the morning. But I don't think of it. I don't think they will, because time is on their side. The Chinese leadership is smart in the sense that they don't think about next quarter's profits or this year's results. They think in extended time frames, generations. In the long run, you can't stop China from absorbing this thing. They might do it now. They might do it 100 years from now, but they're going to get it. You can make it a porcupine and you can make it a bloody mess, them getting it. You might even prompt them to hit it with tactical nukes. But hypothetically speaking, even if you were to have a war and China were to lose it, do you think that they're not coming back for another war after that and another war after that? Think of how crazy America is about Cuba. The Chinese are more crazy about Taiwan. Okay, they are not going to give up on this. And so when war comes, it will be followed by the number of wars necessary to win. I don't think it's going to come anytime soon, because I think that as technology develops, that the gap of the Taiwan Strait becomes less and less and less significant. Okay, Mr. Putin is the one that worries me, because his whole regime is dependent upon winning in the Ukraine. And I think the stalemate is dangerous, because remember, the Ukraine doesn't have to win. The Ukraine just has to not lose. As long as they keep fighting, Russia doesn't win, and Russia needs to win. So if they get enough F-16s and if they get enough Western arms, my fear is that he does go rogue and does use nukes. And I don't know where that goes, because there will be some sort of response. And then God help us. So I'm not as worried about Taiwan as I am about the Ukraine, but we live in very difficult times. And because the US guaranteed the safety of the Ukraine in the Budapest Accords, they decided to get rid of their nuclear weapons. Given the fine standard we've set, no nation will ever denuclearize ever again. We blew it. Who's next?
Thanks, Ryan.
Hello.
I believe Mark was waiting.
I think I got
before
Mark.
me. Yeah.
What's up, Mark?
Okay, sorry, my mistake.
Cool. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. Similar to what you said about China, when you said that there's kind of two questions. The first one quick, and if the answer is no, the second question's rubbish. The first question, was it just too big, ancient speaking? It was just too big to be democratic. Is that what you meant when you said that earlier? That's why it developed the way it did, in contrast to smaller countries.
Well, think about the polis in Greece. The polis is largely an artifact of the geography of Greece. You have a spine of mountains running down, and it means that you have these small enclaves with access to the sea. What that does is make local control easy, but collective control very difficult, hard to enforce. So, yeah, I think geography has a big element to play in the development of politics. Russia has mostly had centralized autocratic rule, well, because it's too big to seriously consider anything else, is what I suspect. If you go back, the book you would like to look at, I think, is Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. He says, look, one size doesn't fit all. Different sorts of political institutions are most suitable to different kinds of circumstances. If, for example, I had to create a government for a place like Iceland, where it's very homogeneous, everyone is, a large number of people are related to each other, it only has a total population of 250,000, you could have direct democracy there, and I think it would work okay. They have a large consensus about what they like, and they have a large degree of solidarity. That should work. But I don't see democracy working across 13 time zones with, 40 different languages plus Russian. The people there and their interests are very, very varied, and it's hard to do that. So I think that large areas tend to lend themselves to autocratic rule. Now, the problem is, of course, that as democracy scales up, and that is connected to technology, then it becomes a real alternative. But the problem is then that there's a tendency. Well, pardon me?
It's too ingrained by then, perhaps?
Well, I didn't hear exactly. What's contained?
Ingrained.
It's ingrained. Well, it's hard to conquer people that are used to ruling themselves. It's relatively this comes from Machiavelli. It's relatively easy of those who live under an autocracy because they're used to taking orders from somebody. You just knock off the number one guy, put somebody else in there, and you're good to go. It's much harder to rule a group of people that are used to autonomy. And there you either destroy them or you go and live among them and watch everybody. Right. So, yeah, I think that geography and demography are related to political forms. Imagine trying to, it's hard enough to run an election now. Imagine what it'd be like to run an election, say, 2,000 years ago, when China has a population of approximately 100 million people. How would you possibly run a thing like that? What variations in opinion could there be from people that are illiterate, that work in producing on farms, producing rice, and people are happy enough as long as it's not a famine or anything awful happening, getting invaded. You want to talk about political philosophy? Yeah, you could do that, but it's easier with a population that has an education. Education and democracy are closely connected, or often are and should be. Okay.
May I ask again what the name of that book was?
The name of the book is Montesquieu's Spirit of the Law. It's a very famous Enlightenment book. I got a lecture on it too.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, a pleasure. All right, who's next? Is that
Hello,
JT?
Michael.
Hi, JT. What's up?
I think Ryan was next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, who are you?
Hi. I just got
Historicus Joe. Okay.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
No, I just said Dr. Sugrue. I just mentioned that Ryan, I think, was up next in the queue.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I've just got a silly question, probably dangerously mushy, but I was watching your video that you released about world history, and the start of your book was about the Toba catastrophe or the eruption.
Toba, yeah.
And it brought mankind down to 5,000 people, and you said that it created. You said it created a genetic and cultural bottleneck, and you said something I found interesting, that the hunter-gatherers that would have survived, they needed to be more caring for each other, for the ones that were sick. So my question is, do you think that made us kinder, that catastrophe? I don't know,
Well,
it might be a silly question,
It
but
makes us a lot of things.
yeah.
Remember that cannibalism is in the ancestry of every one of us, okay? And whether they killed them to order or whether somebody died that was part of your group, in times of famine, they will get eaten. And don't just shudder and think I'm talking about somebody else. I'm talking about you and me, okay? If you've ever read Cormac McCarthy's The Road, you have no idea what people are capable of. Okay. But think about this, all right? You got 5,000 people. They're scattered in maybe, I don't know, 400 hunter-gatherer bands. Most of them are in Africa. And what's going on? Somebody's giving me all right. All right. Thanks. Why am I getting this feedback? Who did that? What's going on? All right. Let me go back to the Toba. You got 5,000 people. First of all, these 5,000 people are damned lucky. They happen to be someplace, my guess would be often the mouth of a river as it empties into an ocean, because that merging of ecosystems may give them access to different kinds of food, living and dead. Now, one of the things that I read recently, and it seems to be pretty solid, this is one of the things that I sort of like about civilization. And I can give you the site because it's in my text. Apparently, today or nowadays, in contemporary times, there are people in the tropics and people in the Arctic, both of whom take great relish in eating what we would regard as spoiled food. And I'm not talking about mildly spoiled. I mean covered with maggots. I mean food you can smell before you can see. All right. What would cause us to turn away, because it's a botulism feast right there. But here's the deal. What they have found is that both these Arctic nomads and these tropical nomads relish carrion, relish spoiled food, will chase vultures off them, at least in the tropics, and then eat the stuff. And what they said was that we don't eat the smell. Now, what these anthropologists concluded is that our revulsion at spoiled meat, as they put it, is socially constructed. Back after the Toba volcano, you can bet that everybody ate carrion. You had a nuclear winter that went on for 5 to 8 years. No vegetation, nothing for herbivores to eat. So look, what is selected out then is for people that did not have dainty appetites. You can be sure that our ancestors in that predicament, they all ate stuff that we would sooner starve. And I bet there are plenty of human beings that did, but the ones that found a way to choke that down, and not once, but we're talking about 5 to 8 years, and also probably managed to gather fungus because they would still be around. They would not need to photosynthesize, but algae or something. I mean, very, very difficult food circumstances. So what were people like? They were damned lucky. They were completely omnivorous in a way that makes us shudder. They certainly took care of one another, unless, of course, they argued with one another and killed one another, which is the other possibility, and no doubt happens some of the time. The population remains very low, a few thousand people, even after they get out of Africa, move to Saudi Arabia and then to India, and then follow the coast all the way to Australia by 60,000 BC. But as they move, the population numbers are not growing substantially. You know, they grow gradually and the populations diverge. But the big population growth, the point at which we take over the planet, where our position seems pretty secure, that doesn't happen until very, very recently in history. Who's next?
Okay, I think it's me now.
Okay.
Forgive a naive and crude question if it is that, but would you please, with respect to helping to show me the road to this recovering Marxism, maybe expedite my trip a little bit here. Can you help me disentangle what my mind wants to do currently is lump in the Thrasymachus position with the Hobbesian position, and is that too crude?
Okay. Thrasymachus is arguing that might makes right. Hobbes is saying the same thing. The difference is that Thrasymachus, like Renaissance writers and Machiavelli, he has a heroic outlook on the world. So the idea is for him would be something like Caesar Borgia or one of the Greek tyrants. You set yourself up, and then you can kill anyone you want, and you can have sex with anyone you want, and you can steal the property from anyone you want, and that's the best kind of life. Okay. This idea you'll see in Callicles. You want to read a dialogue by Plato called the Gorgias. Write that down. Now, once you look at what Callicles says, you'll find that most of what's in Nietzsche is there. And you'll also find that most of what is in Foucault is there. All right. Now, let's get to this Marxism thing. I wrote a thing when I was 25 or 26. At the time, I thought that I had cracked Marxism. And I published it. It was the first thing I published as a graduate student. And I still think that I did crack it, but I would write it very differently. There's lots of stuff that I didn't explain well. So yeah, if I have some free, I think it's posted. Have a look at it. But the idea is this: Marxism, as those who have read the literature know, is a kind of splicing together of French utopian socialism, like Saint-Simon and Fourier, right, and British political economy, like Adam Smith and Ricardo, right? And also German idealism, like Hegel and Fichte, right? So what we're doing is bringing together three very powerful processes of thought, and Marx tries to braid them together. Now, here's the problem. It turns out that that consciousness or mind in Marx is incoherent, and we can't make it work. It has the properties that a simultaneous equation has. Where I worked for a long time trying to solve the equation, but instead I went back and did something else. I proved that both parts of the equation are not simultaneously soluble. So that means the problem, of course, there are empirical, historical problems, but I found a much worse problem. This is just a logical flaw that can't be fixed. Let me explain to you why I thought that and why I think that. This was a long time ago. Here's the deal. So, excuse me if my memory doesn't work. This was in the mid-'80s. The first line talks about contemporary Marxism. It was still a live ideology then, and I was hoping to become a Marxist theologian. So the idea is this: when you get to ethics, you're going to need, on one hand, free will. You're going to need voluntarism. Think about Lenin's "What is to be done." You got to get people to engage in revolutionary organization and revolutionary violence. All right. If you can't talk them into doing that, you can't have a revolution, and then Marxism is at an impasse. So you absolutely have to find some way to persuade people that it's a good idea to turn their lives upside down, devote themselves to the last and ultimate human transformation, and even be willing to give their lives for the revolution. Okay, you can't have revolutionaries that refuse to get engaged or involved, right? That's necessary to revolutionary praxis. It's particularly necessary to Leninism, but it's necessary to Marxism as a whole. And that tradition, that free will, that voluntarism is a product of German idealism. Think about Kant, for example, right? There's a powerful element of voluntarism, which gets taken up by Hegel. They move from individual to collective subjects. But there is the idea that will is free and responsible and rational, that both Kant and Hegel share. Okay. And Marx is picking things up from Hegel, but he says, what I'm going to do with Hegel is I'm going to turn his idealism into a materialism. Okay, here's how he does that. This is where he reaches out for British political economy. He says, look, these guys are solid, strict materialists, right? The dismal science. They calculate rates of increase and decrease. They calculate prices. There's no voluntarism intrinsically. What it is a series of mechanisms that push the economy around, right? For example, supply and demand. No one person has the capacity of moving with their will what markets charge, but collectively they do because they're impersonal, right? They're caused by forces that are akin to the forces of physics. This is where Marx gets his later, particularly at the Grundrisse, his iron laws of historical development. In other words, we move from archaic societies to slave societies to serfdom to wage labor. And when we break away from that, we're going to end up with communism. Okay, the point is that when we make that break, Marx says, this is the way history goes. This is the actual science of history. He addressed and wrote an appreciation in his third volume of Capital to Darwin. And Darwin said, get this socialist stuff away from me. But he thought he was continuing a naturalistic conception of human evolution, and it was governed by laws of economics. Now, here's where things get messy. If you try and tell people that there are laws of history that are being enacted in front of you, the question emerges, why should I care? It's like saying that gravity is happening. Well, why should I jump up and down either way? Once you have iron laws of historical development, that it doesn't make any difference whether I participate. And then the question emerges, why shouldn't I just chill and watch YouTube rather than start a revolution? So if there are iron laws of historical development, there's no voluntarism to appeal to. If, on the other hand, you want to hold on to that freedom and that voluntarism, you can't have iron laws of history. They really have to be contingent upon human action. So the difficulty is that it's not possible to splice together at the level of ethics the tradition of German idealism and British political or Scotch political economy, because they have different presuppositions about the nature of the world. They have different metaphysical assumptions. These assumptions are realized in their conception of human nature, in their conception of ethics, and the conception of politics. Now, the problem is that this problem never gets resolved in Marx, and that's one of the reasons why he's so great, because whenever you run into an impasse on one side, you can jump to the other. And that's what the Marxists have been doing in the century after Marx died. So all of the Marxist tradition now, I was able to hang on this binary distinction. You had the Marxists, the kind of crude materialistic ones like, who am I thinking of? From the Second International. It'll come to me if I stop thinking about it. But there are crude materialists. Plekhanov is the guy I'm thinking of, right? One thing happens after another. It's all the iron laws of history. But if you ask him, well, what's it to me? Why shouldn't I just go open a drink, have myself a drink and watch you guys have a revolution? Why should I get myself killed over this? There's nothing you can say if history is deterministic. If it's not deterministic, well, then you don't get iron laws of history. But now you can have the voluntarism you need for revolutionary praxis. Think about the way they go. Plekhanov and the other Stalinists go with this crude mechanism. On the other hand, the really sophisticated ones, here I'm thinking about Gramsci and Lukács. They were my favorite Marxists. Why? Because they were actually idealist Marxists who gave up on determinate laws of history, which allowed them to have a revolutionary praxis because they had given up on the Grundrisse phase. If you remember that before the manuscripts of 1863, I think the earliest manuscripts, I forget, 1848, that Gramsci and Lukács predicted that this is what the early Marx thought, and they were right. So the idealist Marxists like Gramsci and Lukács, and people like the critical theorists of Marcuse and Habermas, they're all derived from the early Marx, and they're all into voluntarism. They allow that German tradition of individual choice and freedom. Right, we have the burden of freedom. That's why they so easily connect themselves to existentialism. On the other hand, the mechanistic ones, they're actually empirically testable in history, and they just got it horribly wrong. The mechanistic communists, like Marxists, like Plekhanov, didn't think that World War I was going to happen. Right, they thought that the working people would all unite. Instead, they united behind their own ruling classes and killed each other. So Marxism, insofar as it's a set of laws of history, is a real science and can be is falsifiable, and it's been falsified 100 times. Marxism that keeps on that element of voluntarism, that keeps on that idealist element, and we see it's still existing today in the kind of popularization of critical theory. Well, what that is a kind of idealism. And the reason why that hasn't had a problem with being falsified is that it's not falsifiable. What it is a set of metaphysical propositions that gives up on the laws of history that are necessary to make Marxism a plausible choice for politics. Maybe other alternatives that don't involve killing everybody are possible. Maybe we don't have to have a gulag. Maybe we don't have to kill a third of the population the way Pol Pot did. Now you see why I'm a recovering Marxist. I think I caught them in a logical contradiction. I think it's intrinsically, in a mathematical sense, insoluble. And so yeah.
How do we have is it by our philosophies, our socio-political philosophies, that we have that discussion of how much social murder, how much corruption, and what kind? Is it a more modern Thrasymachus that is right in the end?
I don't think so, because remember, Thrasymachus is telling people, you know what's really a great idea? PPP, pure predator parasitism. And I'm pointing out that he has he's looking to the fun he can have murdering and raping people this week. But Thrasymachus' grandson is going to have his head on a stick because this is intrinsically unstable. Check this out. The most conservative thing a ruling class can do anywhere, anytime, is to provide everybody else with justice. You want to hang around and you want to be here for a long time? Practice justice. What is going to destroy you is you destroying yourself through injustice. So Socrates was right. He said, Thrasymachus, you're doing this because you think it's good for you, but it's not, you nitwit. Right? What you think is good is like a kid saying, oh yeah, I think I'll eat all the candy in the store. Well, actually, restraining yourself, which is, remember what I said religion does with justice? Restraining yourself is actually a lot better for you. And then Thrasymachus says, oh, damn, he might be right. And so he shuts up. And then later on, we'll find out what happens to him. But you see, look, it's not that might makes right, but rather that might is necessary to sustain what is right. The tragic part is it can also, at least for a time, sustain what is wrong. Okay. Does that make any sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
You really want to read the Gorgias, and then you maybe want to take a look at how I flog Foucault, who I have just no patience for. If you want to think about a guy who lives a really Foucauldian life, someone who completely abolishes morals. I don't know if you know his discussion with Chomsky in the 60s, but Chomsky said it was like talking to someone from another species, right? He just made no moral distinctions at all. And Chomsky, whatever his beliefs, believes that justice is real. Foucault just didn't. He said, look, the underclass revolts so that they can do the stuff that the upper class was used to be doing to them, not for any justice or anything like that. That's the philosophy of PPP. It's just been reinvented and packaged as something new. This is not new. It's actually really old. All right. And we know how this works. All right. It collapses. So, yeah, that's what I always tell ruling elites if I'm ever asked, you want to hang around? Treat everybody justly. The more corruption you let in, the sooner you're going to be superseded, until somebody gets the good idea of restraining themselves, because that's the only way that you can get a fully domesticated society, is if the elite are animals that domesticate themselves. And the thing that allows them to do that is religion. It's intended, or its function is to restrain the elite, not to restrain the people. People are already restrained. So this is an inverse of what's right. All right. Who's next?
I believe Kyle.
Kyle, yeah.
Yes. Second question. How reformative was the Bronze Age collapse, and who do you believe the Sea People were?
Yeah. Everybody wants me to break out the crystal ball tonight. My guess is that they are driven from the north, that the Sea People are related to the Doric invasions in Greece. They seem to get over to Crete as well. They may be the source or the superseders of or connected to them conquering the Minoan civilization. So I think they probably came from the north. That would make me guess the Black Sea, but I don't know. We know that their language was different, that they're the source of the Philistines and the Canaanites. The new work being done on historical DNA is of immense significance, because now they're starting to plot the actual movements of peoples. And right now, I don't know what the data reveals, but my guess is that they come from the north, and that they are driven by large movements of population on the steppes of Eurasia. In other words, if they're coming from the Black Sea and they want to get out of there, no one decides to, no group of people, no whole society says, let's go on vacation together. If they all decide to leave at the same time, it's because they're threatened with genocide. All right. So it's fear that drives them. That's why the Germanic tribes invaded the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire. They liked it better than the steppe nomads, who were fiercely dangerous. Better the Romans than the Huns. So I don't know who these Sea People are. What causes the collapse of the 11th century? My guess is it has a lot to do with the breakup of trade. In other words, look, by 2000, we have an amazing trade network, and it's more extensive than we realize. Okay, the two original RVCs that we had, River Valley civilizations, were Egypt and Mesopotamia. That's what we knew about. And then eventually we found that there was one in the Indus, a little bit to the east. But what recent archaeology has shown us is that there's one north of the Indus on the Oxus. So at 2000 BC, you have a river valley civilization all the way up there, and some goods from China have been found there. So I don't think it was usual. It's not like the Silk Road, but there is a long distance trade that and remember, trade is in ideas, but also in goods, but also in ideas. And it goes all the way to Central Asia, right? The Oxus River is accessible to the steppes on a great many sides, which is what leads them to being destroyed. In addition to that, at Dukigel, which is the second cataract of the Nile in the Sudan, they have found another big river valley civilization that had access to Central Africa. So my point is that these new nodes at the end of this great route of exchange and trade made possible connections from the center of Africa to the center of Asia. That's a way, right? So, yeah. Hello?
Yo, mute your mic, guys.
I don't know what. All right.
It's muted now.
Is that an answer? We good with that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I know I say I don't know a lot. You have to be careful, but don't trust teachers that never say I don't know. You just don't want teachers that say it all the time, if you see what I'm saying. All right. What's the next question? Who's next?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know, all this talk of like Marx and stuff. I want to jump in on this, but I had written down a question earlier, which I just think will probably be more good. I think it'll be interesting. So, what is the relationship of nature to freedom? Earlier, you were talking about the relationship of nature to society. Does society create itself kind of spontaneously? Does it emerge out of nature? You were talking about the relationship there, and I'm wondering how does freedom play into this?
It's real hard, I admit. I mean, it's connected to what Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. Not only do we experience subjective states of mind, like looking at something that's red, we also experience the world as if we were making choices independent of antecedent events. Now, of course, it's not possible, one assumes, but the question is, of course, are we sure what antecedent events cause us to engage in activity that does not seem determined by antecedent events? When I used to be teaching class, I used to just hold up my tie and I said, when I was getting dressed this morning, I had the sense of, I can pick a tie from a number of ties that I have. I chose this one, I put this one on. We go back to the funny question of whether we judge our theories by our experience or our experience by our theories. Somebody can tell me that they have a very fine biochemical account of why I raise my hand in this way at this time, making this point in this lecture, but that's not how I experience the world. I feel and I experience the world as if I'm acting freely. Now, is my experience wrong? Wrong compared to what? Are we going to decide that we like the tidiness of materialism so much that we're willing to accept the sterility that comes with that level of tidiness?
I think nobody enjoys that, right? Everyone's like, well, but by freedom, though, I think like most people, have that intuition.
Well, it depends on whether you mean metaphysical freedom in the sense of freedom of choice, or are you talking about political freedom in the sense of being allowed to vote and exercise rights?
Oh, metaphysical, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, everybody, as far as I know, experiences the world as if they're not a robot or an automaton. I wouldn't be surprised if we looked in the DSM that people who say to their psychiatrists that I'm a mechanism entirely determined by my environment, I'm almost certain that there's going to be some kind of entry for that. I'm not sure of it, but I suspect there is. And I don't think that's
my wife. My wife is a psychiatrist.
Okay, or arbitrary. I think that someone who thinks that they're a mechanism and actually says so, their mental activity is probably going to be a difficulty. One way of thinking about psychiatric disease is that it's a systematic flaw in communication. If you use the word, if everybody else uses the word Napoleon to refer to a dead French general, but you keep saying, I am Napoleon, I am Napoleon, I am Napoleon, people will notice that you're deploying the word Napoleon in an unusual and disconcerting way. And another way of describing that is being crazy. All right. So interruptions in our capacity to communicate is what mental breakdown or mental illness is, I think. It'll be connected with action, of course, but verbal activity is a particularly important set of what would I say, symptoms. Okay. Further, who's next? Would it be Olive?
Hello. Yes, it would be me again.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm coming back to annoy you again with another question.
No, I like teaching. I get bored if I don't.
But I really want to. I find it very fascinating that you not to make criticism, but it's interesting that you say that you are in the light of God in a sense.
I feel the presence of God. Read Meister Eckhart's the best I can do. Nobody can really talk about that.
No one can. No one can. Well,
I believe in God. I
wanna-
have doubts about theology.
Yeah, but no, but like I want to learn about the Good Samaritan, the love and reason, the Venn diagram. I just don't know where to go from there in a sense. Like,
You look at your life and you connect with other people and you learn to get beyond the prison of yourself. Your ego's a prison.
Yeah.
All right. The world doesn't end at your fingertips, nor do your obligations end there. Human beings are social animals.
Yes.
A rapacious selfishness is going to ruin you, not just the people around you. This is the point that was being made when Socrates talked to Thrasymachus in the first book. Or better, another way of saying it is that one of the repetitive memnonic lines in the Quran, it says, if you did justice to your neighbor or to a person that is indebted to you and let the debt go, it would be better for you if you but knew it. And I like that last line, if you but knew it. Socrates is trying to explain to a couple of people what they would do and how they would live if they but knew it. That's the tricky part. Yes.
Hello, Michael.
Hi.
I was actually watching your lecture on Western history this morning, and then I'm in Australia at the moment, so I had to stop halfway through to join you. I've been very inspired by your work, and part of what I've been thinking a lot about lately is ontology and starting to understand that more. Just thinking about your comments about, I really like your analogy of the operating system and the applications, and sort of this insistence on you don't have to have a scientific revolution to have change, but every time there is a scientific revolution, there is change. Through the thinking about ontology, I was sort of imagining if in a way, a scientific revolution is almost humanity discovering a new ontological technology. Like, I suppose that sounds abstract, but I guess what I'm saying is like my own experience watching my friend's child grow up, I'm discovering them learn object permanence and things like self-restraint, which rewatching your lectures on the Homerific epic and Troy and Achilles, I was fascinated by the idea of Achilles not knowing self-restraint and it needing to be a divine intervention. But I guess what I'm saying is on the civilizational level, do you think that's a way of understanding what scientific revolutions are?
I think it is, but I think it's more complicated than it has to be. All right. And you might find it easier to deal with. You simplified it. We have, if we go to university libraries and then you go to the philosophy section, you can see whole shelves of multi-volume works on ontology. They're all going to explain to you what being is. And I don't make much progress through those. I think that, I think the answer is right in front of you. What being is a verb. It's a verb that connects subjects and predicates in all of the languages derived from Proto-Indo-European. So that means all of Sanskrit and everything west through Europe and into the Middle East, but no further because the Afro-Semitic languages take over. But this structure of having being as a copulative verb, which connects predicates and subjects, you may want to wonder, what does being mean on its own? And what it means is, let me show you. This is in my Descartes lecture, I think. But think of Tarzan. And what he says is me, Tarzan, her, Jane, him, Cheetah. His ontology is exactly the same as ours. He's Tarzan, she is Jane, he is Cheetah. But when you subtract being, the copulative verbs there, because his grammar is lacking, what that means is his metaphysics is also lacking, and it doesn't make any difference. Here's an algebra problem for you. X minus y equals 0. For any for any x, what's the value of y? It has to be 0 too, because he's subtracting. When you subtract it, nothing is lost. When I talk in Tarzan language, nothing is lost from the meaning of the sentence. I am Tarzan. She is Jane. You are Cheetah. So what it appears to me is that when you subtract it, nothing is lost, which means that the cognitive value is 0. What it is a plus sign telling you that the beginning of the sentence, the subject, is connected to the thing that comes after it, which is the predicate.
Yes. So it's almost like saying that being is entirely a linguistic artifact with a certain history, and it's
that is exactly right.
Value function is essentially 0. It's 0.
No, it's not 0. It's a really handy thing if you want to speak the Indo-European languages.
Yes, yeah. I see.
What does this refer to? What mysterious stuff that glows in the dark? As Wittgenstein says, it's a beautiful line. Metaphysics is the shadow cast upon our understanding by grammar.
Yeah.
So stop hunting for the meaning of your grammar. What Descartes finds, you should check my lecture on it, when he figures out the ultimate structure of reality, what he's really figuring out is the ultimate structure of French. He finds that I think, therefore I am, because he can't be anything unless he is, because he's thinking in French and also in Latin and also in Greek. And he thinks that a universal quality of language, not a quality of the Indo-European languages, which are the only ones he knows. You could
I think I didn't get around to learning German.
You could connect predicate. Well, no, I mean, that's going to be Indo-European. I mean, Zion, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, etre. I mean, look, you're going to have to go very far afield to get out from under that. Right. It's perfectly possible to have a system of language that just connects subject and predicate and doesn't put something in there to say this is connected to that, because this is connected to that when you talk. Tarzan, Eugene.
I'll move on so that I don't take
Stop
up time.
Stop flogging yourself about ontology.
Thank you very much.
Nothing to talk about. Don't mystify yourself.
Thank you.
All right, who's next? I'm going to have to wind up soon. I've been at this 2 hours, and I'm not quite ready to crawl away and die, but we're moving in that direction. Who's next? Is it Oliver or Sage or Jesse?
Hey,
I think it's me.
Sage.
All right,
Yep,
somebody.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. My question, it's kind of more contemporary, and it's just starting university. I'm starting to realize how much the postmodern, post-structuralists are still taken really serious. And I know how you kind of feel about that. But actually, I had a prof bring up something kind of interesting. She brought up this kind of meta-modernist idea, this kind of where we're trying to move past the postmodern, post-structuralists.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, because I know how you feel, their lack of morality and skepticism, but what do you actually think is worth, or do you think anything is salvageable in these thinkers, even going back to, Foucault, Deleuze, Lacan? I just wonder, because I haven't heard you really say anything affirmative. I just wonder
if
you think there's anything left.
All right, now this is a good question. I think that both French and German thinkers are, at least the last couple of generations, say 2 or 3 generations, I think that they're suffering from something roughly like collective PTSD. In other words, these are historically traumatized cultures that cut each other's throats in a kind of mutual suicide pact. They ran the planet for 400 years. No one could displace them, but they stopped restraining themselves and destroyed themselves. So the last couple of generations have been disoriented and also full of rage and bitterness. All right. So remember that the intellectual elite from Germany and from France and from most of the other European continental countries have been really smacked around a lot. They are angry and they are hurt, and they are looking for somebody to blame. Now, one of the hardest things in the world is to blame yourself. In other words, European culture engaged in a stupid mutual suicide pact. Mm-hmm. But I think the French have never forgiven us for helping them, and the Germans have never completely forgiven us for conquering in the Second World War. But now they have a negative, destructive attitude towards what emerged in the post-war era. They feel threatened, and with good reason, by both America and the Russians. The Russians are there, and there's a good story that one of my Texan friends told me a long time ago. He said, "I don't want to own all the land in the world. I just want to own all the land that's connected to mine." That's pretty much what Russian foreign policy looks like. They don't want to control all of Eurasia. They just want to take over and incorporate whatever it is on their border. You see, I mean, it's never going to stop. Their border is too big to defend, so they're always paranoid, and they have good reason to be. The Americans aren't so much likely to invade the Europeans as they are to take over their culture and fill it full of Coca-Cola and Beyonce. And that soft power is something they resent too.
Yeah.
So my sense is that we should take the European tradition with a grain of salt, because they are like the Athenians after Athens had been destroyed, looking for somebody to blame. All right. Capitalism is the most usual suspect, but it seems to me that capitalism may be behind the rise of something like fascist Italy or Germany, if you want to see them as intrinsically connected. But what we had in America, for all its faults, wasn't fascism. Right. I like the New Deal better than I like black shirts. I think there's a qualitative difference.
Okay.
Maybe one more question, because I'm coming to the end of this, and I'm too old to talk forever.
I think it's R now.
Okay. Does somebody want a question? Or?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry if this is off topic, but I'm just curious. What are your favorite movies? And is there like a big list somewhere I could see a list of your favorite movies?
No, but I talked about it with Darren, and I think with my daughter Genevieve on one of the idea store things. But I think one of the greatest my favorite director is Kubrick. I think one of the greatest movies is Clockwork Orange. I have an interpretation of that. Look up my lecture on it, Clockwork Orange. But what people have failed to notice, that maybe you will notice if you know both the movie and the novel and Plato's Republic, is that when Alex gets taken to the theater and forced to watch the ultra-violent films of murder and rape and stuff, that's a recapitulation of Plato's cave. And what Kubrick is saying is that the new poets that are corrupting us, they don't make poems, they make videos. And that we're Alex, because we've undergone the Ludovico technique. And we think we're free, but in fact, we're in bondage to these images. So yeah, I have a real elaborate work out of that, but I've never seen in any print discussion or even in Kubrick's interviews about it, pointing out what seems obvious to me, that it's a Platonic critique of 20th century art, saying essentially that it's not moral. Right? So I like Kubrick. 2001, one of my favorites, far and away. All right. Jupiter's an egg, and the ship is a sperm. It is traveling towards the egg. That's where the star baby gets conceived. And then we move on to a new macro level of evolution. That's the best sense I can make out of it. He gets beyond the subject-object distinction, which means that he, in a way, solves Chalmers' problem, hard problem of consciousness. Because when he's in that strange room, lying in that bed, he's in the bed observing the room, but he's also outside himself, observing himself. The subject-object distinction is broken down, whatever that might mean. That's why it looks so weird and incomprehensible. It is incomprehensible. Remember that the next time you try and reduce consciousness to a bunch of biochemistry. All right. I don't know if we'll ever be able to solve the hard problem of consciousness. On the one hand, it seems to be very, very intractable. I can't even imagine how you would gain a foothold on this. On the other hand, forever is a long time. God only knows what people will figure out in the future. So never say never. But I think we have to acknowledge that this is an unusual and particularly difficult problem. I've been told by my friends who are doctors that the most complicated object known is the human brain, and that nobody knows how it works. And I think it's a great, one of the most important things that science inquires into. But if you'll ever be able to make the jump from objective to subjective, I don't know. You know, it seems to me like difficult either way. And God only knows what the implications of that will be for us. I'm going to have to let you go now. I really don't have much juice left in me, but I will talk next month. I forget what it is we're reading, but no doubt it'll be part of my book. I'll post that.
It will be McGilchrist, I think, for next month.
Okay, yeah. I mean, well, have a look at McGilchrist. I wouldn't require you to read that whole thing. That's a really hard book. I mean, I found that an arduous journey. Regular people that aren't used to that are going to find it very difficult. So maybe McGilchrist is a part of it. I don't remember, again, what the reading list looks like, but, I'm going to Onions, that's a much better choice. That's a much more digestible book. Onions. But what I want to talk about is this. I'm going to post the first, 75 or 80 pages of my new improved version. It'll only go from the beginning to the end of the historiographical section. But the historiographical section adds in a book that I haven't covered before, which I really took the hammer to. It's called The Dawn of Everything. It was just far too cute for my taste, and I just went wild on it. So you get about 10,000 words, me explaining why this doesn't work and why this is seriously, factually wrong. That ends the historiographical section, and then the month after, I'll give you the section of what I'm doing next, what the alternative is, where I want to go. I want to say that my big message is we're one species under different constraints. The world isn't full of perfect people or perfectly imperfect people. We have to find a way to justify and show gratitude for the billions of people who are our ancestors that suffered and endured an awful lot so that we could have what we have. So I think cultivating an understanding and an appreciation of the legacy we've been handed down helps us in the process of trying to atone for our collective sins against ourselves and actually look for something which will allow for more cooperation than conflict. The greatest achievements of the human species have not been their conflicts. They've been things like Apollo 11 or the Great Wall of China, where an enormous number of people got together for quite an extended period of intensive work. And by working together, cooperating, they managed to get results that were world historical and transformative.
Wow.
So finding a way to cooperate is connected with that theme that I raised earlier, the need for elites to find a path to justice. And that is always articulated in some kind of religious tradition. I'll let you go. Good night to all of you. See you next month.
Good night, Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Sugrue.
Thanks,